One of Wright's first apprentices had been Edgar Kaufman, Jr., the son of a wealthy Pittsburgh department store owner. He hadn't stayed with architecture very long himself, but his father had become fascinated with Frank Lloyd Wright, and in 1934 asked him to design a weekend hideaway for his family next to their favorite waterfall along a little stream in western Pennsylvania called Bear Run. Wright visited the site, had the apprentices make an elaborate plot plan that showed the location of every rock and tree, and then did nothing for 3 months.
He never liked to draw until he knew what he was going to draw. And every so often we would ask, Mr. Wright, are you going to do something? And he'd say yes, and he'd walk by. All of a sudden, one day, he gets a telephone call from Mr. Kaufman.
Kaufman was in Milwaukee, just a few hours away from Taliesin.
Mr. Wright says, hello, E.J., how are you? Come along, we're waiting for you. And he hung up. Milwaukee is 140 miles, 140 minutes, and he hasn't drawn a line. Kaufman, the client, is on his way, and he sits down, and he starts to draw, and he draws a plan. And he draws the first floor plan, how it relates to everything. It's got to be a bridge so you can get across the water. The water shows just where the waterfall is. He draws the second floor plan, and he goes along and shows how the balconies are, and he says, and we'll have a bridge across so that E.J. and Lillian, that was her name, can walk out and walk from the bedrooms or from the house up and have a picnic up above. Then the top floor is Junior's room. Then he draws what we call a section through the building. That's the way you can see how all the heights are. And he's drawing and drawing, and Bob and I are feeding him pencils. He breaks them, and he puts a color on, and then takes it off, and he rubs it all off, and so on. And anytime anyone walks in the drafting room, you turn around, shh, you don't wait. And people knew if Mr. Wright's working, and you don't walk through the drafting room. Then he starts to draw an elevation, a big elevation of the whole house. And the whole drawing is actually that big. Normally, we start at a scale where you draw this big, but no, he's got it going this big. And he's putting the trees, and he knows where every damn tree is, where every rock is. He gets that all done, and then his Mr. Wright's secretary comes in and says, Mr. Wright, Mr. Kaufman is here. He says, bring him in. And Mr. Wright gets up. He just stands up, and he walks toward Kaufman, and he puts out his hand, and he says, welcome, E.J. We've been waiting for you.
Wright named his building Fallingwater. It would eventually become the most famous modern house in the world. And he had drawn it all in less than 3 hours.
Wright asked